Senator Singh.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Mr Acting Deputy President, I rise today to speak on the issue of asbestos and the failure of home renovation TV shows to highlight the dangers of this toxic substance. Australia is a country with one of the highest rates of mesothelioma diagnosis in the world, and of course it is now banned in Australia and in 50 other countries. And we know it is still, though, being used, mined, exported in other countries, and one only had to see the ABC's Foreign Correspondent program last night, where Matt Peacock highlighted, in fact, the trade of asbestos from Canada to India. Something like 90% of India's asbestos comes from Canada, as just one example of the ongoing issues internationally that need attention in relation to the trade, export and use and mining of asbestos. Australia, of course, has been working very actively with the UN community, including signatories to the Rotterdam Convention, to have strong restrictions placed on the trade of asbestos, and we ratified the ILO Asbestos Convention this year also. I will have more to say on the issue of the international efforts and issues internationally with asbestos in the future, but today I want to focus my attention on asbestos closer to home. Australians are increasingly turning their hand to DIY home renovations, as renovation TV shows such as The Block, the Renovators, Backyard Blitz, just to name a few, appear on our TV screens. And the community is inspired by such shows, and come to the weekend, people head down to their local hardware store, purchase a few tools and equipment and proceed to take a sledgehammer to the walls of their homes. It looks easy enough when the people on these reality TV shows do it, so why not? But my concern, Mr Acting Deputy President, is the presence of asbestos and the fact that these DIY home renovators are unknowingly putting themselves at huge risk. The presence of asbestos in any home built between the 1940s and 1980s is highly likely. And when it comes to the dangers associated with asbestos, there is absolutely no doubt regarding the carcinogenic nature of this substance. We know that exposure to asbestos results in terminal illness and ultimately in death, and we have known this for years. In the year 1982, there were around 160 cases of mesothelioma cancer reported in Australia, and that number had quadrupled by 2004 to nearly 600. The University of Sydney produced a study that estimates that nearly 18,000 mesothelioma cases will be reported by 2020. And Australia, of course, has experienced two waves of asbestos-related disease. The first associated with the mining of the substance and the manufacturing of asbestos products. The second wave is from asbestos use in industry, most commonly in the building and construction industry. But asbestos-related diseases are not limited to the thousands of workers who were exposed before the carcinogenic nature of this substance was fully known. New research released just months ago by the University of Western Australia shows a third wave of asbestos-related deaths, and the cause has been named as DIY home renovations. According to medical experts, it takes between 20 and 40 years for the symptoms of mesothelioma to appear, and as such, mesothelioma rates will continue to rise from work-related exposure. Every year, around 700 Australians are diagnosed with mesothelioma, and asbestos-related disease rates are expected to continue to peak till around 2020. With an estimation there will be a further 40,000 cases of asbestos-related diseases such as asbestosis and lung cancer, and 13,000 cases of mesothelioma by that time, at least. And then one would have hoped that those rates would begin to decline. Sadly, at this point in time, due to home renovators who are unwittingly exposing themselves, this potentially looks to be not the case. Asbestos remains a silent killer, and exposure, even over a short period of time and at a low level, such as during home renovations, can result in the diagnosis of mesothelioma. It only takes one fibre to lodge itself and manifest itself to become an asbestos-related disease. Now, we saw this in a story recently in the Weekend Australian magazine a few weeks ago, in a story where Carol Klinfolt, who was terminally diagnosed with an asbestos-related disease, was the result of home renovations that she undertook in the 1980s. Now, Carol's story told of how she would go and buy the sheets of asbestos from the hardware store. She would sand them back and then sweep up the mess. It was then that she inhaled asbestos dust that has now resulted in her being diagnosed with mesothelioma. Now, her prognosis in 2006 was 6 to 9 months, but Carol is one of only 5% who do survive for 5 years after diagnosis. The average person diagnosed with mesothelioma dies within a year of their diagnosis. Sadly, Carol's story is the same as many others because back then the dangers were not as widely known. Today, there is absolutely no excuses. Therefore, Mr Acting Deputy President, I believe there is an obligation of these DIY TV renovation shows. There is no doubt that as well as making good TV and seeking high ratings, these shows are aimed at turning Australians into DIY home renovators, which is why big hardware companies are so eager to join forces with them and provide free products in return for prominent branding during the airing of these shows. The spin-offs are many, and it certainly makes good business sense, and in that I wish them every success. But what is not good business, however, is failing to highlight whether or not asbestos is present in many of these properties featured on these shows and the necessary care that needs to be taken. Now, asbestos may not always be an issue on some of these shows, but for example, I do understand that one program focused on the renovation of 4 houses built in the Victorian era. But as I mentioned before, any house built between the 1940s and the 1980s is likely to contain asbestos. Therefore, it is grossly irresponsible to fail to make mention of asbestos and alert viewers to the fact that asbestos was something that contestants needed to consider when they were renovating. I've spoken with many working in the asbestos-related area, and they share my concern. Barry Robson of Asbestos Diseases Foundation of Australia said he could barely bring himself to watch the home renovation TV shows. He simply felt too angry at their lack of social responsibility in failing to highlight asbestos as a very real and a very dangerous hazard. Barry joined forces with Mark Lennon from Unions New South Wales, who also raised concerns via the media recently regarding this issue. And I understand Unions New South Wales has written to Channels 7, 9 and 10, calling on them to also include a clear message about the dangers of asbestos during these shows. They received a vague response from Channel 9 and are still waiting on a response from those other channels. One Australian reality renovation TV contestant recently wrote about his experience on a renovation show that he wrote on Facebook, and I quote, "As an asthmatic, I chose not to broom concrete and asbestos dust into my lungs when I renovate. I use a vacuum. In this environment, there is no control over dust and an expectation that you will work in it and then remove your mask to talk on camera. This seriously disturbs me. No one should be exposed to asbestos dust in such circumstances, and certainly not for TV ratings' sake. This is exactly why rules and regulations exist regarding the handling, the removal and the disposal of asbestos. It is why the Gillard Labor government has commissioned an asbestos management review, which will look at asbestos management arrangements and how best to minimise the risk of avoidable exposure, while also suggesting clear strategies for how best to address the issues relating to awareness and management and removal. But in response to the comments raised by this contestant, the show's co-executive producer told the Daily Telegraph that again, and I quote, "All houses were professionally assessed, all asbestos was clearly noted and the renovators had to include licensed asbestos removal in their plans and costs. Our rules clearly state that no contestant is to handle or remove asbestos. Well, Mr Acting Deputy President, that is well and good, but are the viewers, the DIY home renovators, these shows inspire, aware that this is happening behind the scenes? Absolutely not. Are budding DIY home renovators shown what asbestos looks like in a bid to help them identify it themselves? They are not. Are DIY home renovators told of the dangers associated with asbestos and the risk to their health? Again, they are not. And Mr Acting Deputy President, the solution is relatively simple and will cost relatively little money. The issue of asbestos must be highlighted. That is why today I'm calling on these TV programs to act. A simple message along the bottom of the screen with a warning and mention of an asbestos awareness website perhaps is a way of doing this. Having the host highlight the dangers associated with asbestos is another important step. Showing contestants finding asbestos and documenting them taking the correct actions is another. Ignoring the presence of asbestos is not an option. If the TV producers are adhering to the rules and regulations regarding asbestos, as they say they are, and they are identifying it and having it removed by licensed removalists, then all we want is for this to be included in the show. Show people the real story. Don't let these DIY home renovators think renovating is as simple as taking a sledgehammer to a wall. Don't let them assume it is okay to rip down walls without a second thought. Tell people that asbestos can be found in fibro sheeting, in water and drain pipes, in flue pipes, in roofing shingles, in guttering. Up until the 1960s, 25% of all new homes were clad out of asbestos cement. The use of asbestos was only phased out in the 1980s, and of course we've only had a total ban, as I said, introduced since 2003. This is a very real problem. It is not uncommon for garden sheds, for chook sheds to have been built entirely out of asbestos sheeting. And few would give a second thought to ripping it down one weekend and putting themselves, and indeed their families and their neighbours, at huge risk of inhaling this toxic and poisonous substance. It is up to all of us to educate those who are unaware of the dangers of asbestos, but if one person is unknowingly putting themselves at risk, then we are not finished with the job. No one wants to see a spike in the diagnosis of asbestos-related disease 20 or so years from now, and no one wants such a spike to be attributed to the craze of these DIY home renovation TV shows, not when such a simple solution could make all the difference. In closing, Mr Acting Deputy President, I repeat my call for these TV programs to take responsibility and to provide a clear message about the dangers of asbestos to be included during their broadcast. I shall also put this call in writing to these shows today, and I look forward to their action on this. As we know, it's not just former workers in construction and cement manufacturing and the like who, although they are still there and suffering, today there is a third wave, unwitting home renovators who will potentially die without a chance of recovery and add to Australia's high statistics of suffering and death from asbestos-related disease. We have to turn this around. And those home TV renovation shows have a captive audience. They have high ratings. Why not be good corporate citizens and do the right thing by those viewers who take their time to watch those programs, to learn from them, be entertained, but also to be educated about how they should go about their home renovations? Why not give them that message that they so duly need to avoid future suffering and death in our Australian asbestos statistics in the future?